how's the wormy doing? I don't know. I don't know what who wormy is. You Brit? I'm British? When did I become British? You guys are silly. I just had my salad before starting stream. I feel so energized. Let's go. Let's do this. I will destroy all in my path. Here we go. Let's do this. Bum, 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 bum. Ring. Who be doing things? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Hoodie bam! My face make. The house chat doing? How y'all doing? How your kobolds doing? How your dummies doing? Blah 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 blah. I want to react to the new Primarch video. I do. I want to. Does this one look interesting? Blah. All right, I'm gonna beat you all up. All of you gotten beat up, defeated. Jack is defeated because they are small kobolds and I am a dragon. Ooh, this is promising to hear. I love to hear that someone's really good. It makes me so wonderfully happy. So we're gonna be reacting to Magnus, but I was betrayed by the Iterator. Imperial power. We will find out. Seems like a tragic backstory. Hopefully that will be explained to me.
Myth of the Holy Grail, the quest for which was equated with the desire to realize the eternal truth and the living essence of the higher worlds. The possessor of this truth would be transfixed in the knowledge of his own self and strive to bring good to all mankind. With the passage of time, the Grail-related mysteries became a thing of the past, but the passion for the search for eternal truth was transformed into something more. This character trait was characteristic of Magnus the Red, and it was because of it that he condemned his sons to damnation. Magnus the Red, also known during the early years of the Imperium as the Crimson King and the Red Cyclops, was unique among the Primarchs. All of the Emperor's sons were endowed with a psychic gift that manifested itself in different ways. Some had prophetic foresight, supernatural secrecy, or an aura of greatness unavailable to mere mortals. But of all his brothers, it was Magnus who had the most incredible psychic potential, as well as remembering his own creation. Even as his life was being born in the white-hot crucible of genius, he had talked with his father, had delved into his dreams, had contemplated the enormity of his plans, and had realized his place in them. Just as a mother speaks to the unborn child she carries in her womb, so the Emperor spoke to Magnus long before he was born. But an unborn child knows nothing of the world around it, whereas Magnus already knew everything. He had a form of psychic connection to his father, which had functioned during the formative stages in the Emperor's gene laboratories on Terra. This suggested that Magnus the Red's psychic abilities had been deliberately enhanced by the Emperor. Even Magnus's appearance could be the result of the deep metaphysical imprint left on his soul. It is said that an ordinary mortal's eyes at first perceived him as separate images. The glowing skin, as if the veins beneath it were filled with flame, the mighty wings of feathers and gold plates, the copper-red mane dishevelled and ashy, and his face was a continuous...
Wait, I thought there was only one winged son, and that was, what were they called again? Sanctus? He looks really cool, though. He's got the weird, what do you call them? Wing muscles in the, like, the inner part of his chest. I don't know what it's called.
Flicker of light and flesh, as if beneath the skin and muscle lurked not bones, but something more dynamic and energetic. For a moment, he seemed a giant, and then an ordinary man, and then a deity or a being with a million eyes. But then, as consciousness came to order, the mortal's eyes saw a warrior with copper-red skin. Over the warrior's shoulders fluttered a cloak of feathers, to which were attached censers and wax-sealed parchments. Black curved ebonite horns protruded from his breastplate, and an identical pair rose behind his shoulders. From beneath his belt dangled a light-coloured tabard decorated with a blazing solar disk, and at his side a heavy book bound in thick red leather was fastened on golden chains.
dude really goes into the... I don't know. That's like a neat aesthetic right there. Horns, gold, and copper red skin. That makes him very different than his brothers, right? Because none of his other brothers have, like... Well, not even... Yeah, not even Vulcan had the skin until he was born on that planet, where it, like, basically darkened his skin. This guy, he's like, I'm gonna be born with copper skin.
Such a perfect creature is marred by one flaw. The Primarch looks at the world with only this one eye. Where the other eye should have been, the skin shone smooth and even, as if the other eye socket had never existed. It is said that his unique horned armor was not only a tangible physical construct, but also a thing of concentrated psychic energy that changed shape and appearance at the Primarch's will. Such armor was resistant to the most destructive weapons, despite its primitive appearance. In his hands, Magnus carried the blade of Annunura, a power weapon. He also had a handgun of immense size, the Volkite Serpenta. Even among the Thousand Suns, there was an ongoing debate as to whether this powerful plasma weapon was a device or simply a manifestation of his psychic abilities in physical form. His home is the planet Prospero, which has long been inhabited by psychers capable of warp flows. They made this world home because of its inaccessibility, having been persecuted as sorcerers since the dark age of technology. When the incubation capsule carrying the Primarch appeared in the skies, they mistook it for a giant, intimidating comet that eventually fell into the central square of Tizca. The child found in the capsule soon became an apprentice to the psycho scientists who ruled the planet and developed psi abilities similar to their own, because community, and quickly learned everything they could give him. He surpassed Prospero's most illustrious scientists within a year of his arrival on the planet.
That had got to make some people jealous. Because humans, like any like story that has humans in it, like jealousy would have been rampant. That he just, oh, I've been here a year. I'm going to learn everything and start surpassing you. That grows abnormally fast.
Beliefs were too straightforward and dogmatic for him. His intellect in every way surpassed the minds of those who tried to teach him. Even his initial training had yielded far more than they could give him. Soon the young man made a trek into Prospero's wastelands. True strength is given only to those who subject themselves to the most severe trials. Within the confines of the community, he knew no fears, no hunger, no special hardships, and therefore had no reason to test the limits of his abilities. It was necessary to test his strength to see if those limits even existed. Magnus believed that outside the city he could do it or perish. He traveled hundreds of miles.
So, like, is Magnus... I'm trying to understand Magnus a little bit. Is he, like, almost, like, the same as his father? Basically, like, the ends justify the means kind of guy?
On roads through ruined cities where the metal frames of tall towers, deserted plazas, and vast amphitheaters still remained. Then he climbed a mountain and reached a bend where a long-dead sculptor had erected a huge statue of a bird carved from multicolored stone. It was a majestic figure with raised wings and a graceful swan's neck. The statue perched on the edge of the cliff and stood there for thousands of years, swaying and yet keeping its balance. But with Magnus's appearance, it tumbled down the cliff and shattered into thousands of colored shards. For days, he studied the remains of the statue until he saw a pattern. The different sizes of the shards combined to form different geometric shapes. Magnus realized this and began to put them together. The longer he immersed himself in understanding the patterns, the more complex the shapes became. Magnus was discovered by Aemon, who had been his mentor in his younger days on Prospero. By then, young Magnus had already completed one grimoire and was beginning to fill out a second. The patterns created by the shards of stone carried information about the complex processes of the universe. Together with Aemon, they returned home and told the sages of Tizca about their discovery. They were great men, and their admiration for the beauty of nature helped them to penetrate.
Very interesting. Like, what they keep explaining about Magnus is he's very an intellectual first and foremost.
The essence of the observations. They were so excited that they hastened to repeat Magnus's pilgrimage and reached the place where the statue had stood. The shards of stone lay as they were, and the Tizca's magisters began to fill in their grimoires. Some described triangular compositions, others dealt with circles, and some gave their full attention to the vast colour spectrum of the stones. Later, the scholar pilgrims were attacked by the Psychnuin. Each group manifested a variety of powers with which they repelled the attack. That day, they were able to gain a deeper understanding of the gifts of the great ocean, and returning to Tizca, dispersed to their pyramids to reflect on their experiences. Thus were born the societies that would become the basis for the structure of the Legion of 1,000 Suns fraternities in the future. Rising as a leader, Magnus united the mage cults and set about rebuilding civilization. The capital city of Tizca was transformed into a city of breathtaking beauty. Beautifully designed, pyramid-shaped buildings and towers of glass and marble, wide boulevards, paradisiacal parks, and a constantly favourable mental background soon led to the bliss of the entire population. This period of peace, prosperity and mental well-being was reflected in the planet's population, and Prospero became known as a planet of physically and spiritually beautiful people. Cyclops also set out to unify and expand the Prosperians' knowledge of the Great Ocean.
I heard they calling him Cyclops. His name's Magnus.
Came to say hello. Before food is done. Not Sheng. No mashed potatoes for the boka, only collard.
I had dragon salad. I'm good.
To achieve this goal, he built the great library in the center of the pyramid of Tizca. And later, he discarded all warnings from his wise teacher Aemon about the dangers of delving too deeply into the immaterium. And for the first time, did something that the other inhabitants of Prospero had not done. Instead of summoning the energy of the great ocean into the material world, Magnus stepped into the warp himself and explored its farthest reaches. Noticing the presence of such a powerful mind in the immaterium, the Emperor sent the great crusade fleet to Prospero, and when he stepped onto the surface, Magnus greeted him like an old friend. Decades later, he recalled returning to the world of his birth with his father, how they traveled along forgotten paths and explored ancient secrets. The Emperor generously shared with him the secrets of the universe and his wisdom, not suspecting that his student would soon surpass his teacher.
No
the red-hot deserts of Meganesia and
guys, it's the Magnus React. No TCS, or I'll turn it off.
The invisible paths that the first people who inhabited these lands called songlines. In other worlds, these paths were called Lei or Lung Mei, and denoted the lines along which the blood of the gods flowed, mysterious streams of energy. His father had told him that the shamans of ancient terror could touch these currents and draw power beyond the reach of other mortals. Many of them aspired to become gods themselves, to found an empire and enslave the rest of the population.
Okay. Wait. Is that like how he actually is? Does he have like robotics in his arms and stuff?
In addition to that, Magnus gave up his eye in exchange for this knowledge, but the Primarch himself never confirmed or denied these tales. After all, it was his favourite legend. Perhaps the chronicler who invented it was unwittingly referring to an ancient Terran myth about a Scandinavian god, Odin, who sacrificed an eye in exchange for a sip from the well of Mimir. Not a single Primarch remembered the face of Magnus with two eyes. The Crimson King granted his sons knowledge of mental states, with which they could better control their emotions when using psi powers. This tool was called the enumerations. The higher the level of the enumerations, the more spiritual purity was inherent in the psyche.
So he cured them all and stuff. So like, was his like legion like one of the strongest when it came to like psyker abilities or something? Was he like the Psyker Primarch?
As the individual became more free from the corrupting demands of the ego. The 10th level of the enumerations was labelled by Ahriman as the highest attainable. It is known, though, that Magnus knew much more than these practices. Mastering the enumerations allowed practitioners of the psychic arts to rise up the social hierarchy of Prospero's inhabitants. Not everyone advanced beyond a certain level, though. There was at least one member of Magnus's inner circle, Hathor Mart, who never achieved absolute mastery of enumerations. Cult of the Pavoni in general had particular difficulty with this because of their inherent vanity and self-centeredness. When word reached Terra that the abnormal mutations had stopped, the Thousand Sons joined the crusade. Magnus fought bravely in the Great Crusade, but he was drawn to the Great Ocean and the secrets hidden in its waves, which he sought out and devoured with great zeal. He made contact with long-isolated human cultures scattered in various corners of the galaxy, where the Psykers had the opportunity to thrive in isolation. There he collected arcane knowledge of sorcery from various human cultures.
Basically, this Primarch is the magic Primarch, from what I'm gathering. He likes knowledge to a fault. Like, he goes out of his way to collect it. In which, like, early on it seems to have helped, but I have a feeling that later on it's going to be kind of a detriment.
From them he compiled a monumental volume on magic and psychic practices known as the Book of Magnus. Its shimmering binding was made from the hide of a slain Psychnoian. The Primarch carried it with him, fastened to his armor with a heavy gold chain, and it filled as he found new knowledge. The farther the fleets traveled from Terra, the more strange creatures they encountered. Many of them were affected by the warp, and that cast an ominous shadow of suspicion on Magnus and the Thousand Sons, for their magical abilities were very similar to the skills displayed by these evil creatures. As a result, distrust of Magnus began to grow after the joint actions of the Thousand Sons with the other legions. There were rumors that the Thousand Sons were transporting entire libraries on their ships to eventually place them in the Prosperian archives. In addition, Magnus's relations with even those brothers who had initially treated him well began to deteriorate. For example, the Thousand Sons...
Yeah, it doesn't seem like he would care about, like, being cordial with his brothers. He'd look down on that. He'd treat that kind of like the things mortals would do. I think he's slowly forgetting, like, his roots. He's so wrapped up in getting all this other knowledge and magic.
For help from the planet Morgenstern. They were later joined by the Iron Warriors. They tried to evacuate the population, for the abnormally rapid change of magnetic poles was causing tectonic shifts and threatened the entire population of the planet with extinction. On the surface, the Space Marines were opposed by the cult of the Sons of Shaitan, whose influence affected almost the entire population of the planet. Some communities reacted negatively to the rescue attempts and claimed that everything that was happening was a test. And after the end, the entire population of the planet would ascend as sons. Magnus and Perturabo acted together like brothers who had been friends since the cradle, even though they had known each other for only a few short years. It was obvious that the bonds of this friendship would never dissolve. The Legionnaires listened with pleasure to Magnus's stories of how he and his kinsmen had spent their time on Terra, searching for the legacy of a long-dead polymath and unearthing mysterious artifacts in forgotten corners of old Earth. During one of their audiences, Perturabo showed Magnus a model of the Antikythera, a navigational instrument similar to a sextant for traveling the Great Ocean. It was strange to Magnus to see such an elegant device in the hands of Perturabo, but the next moment he smashed it with his hammer. Perturabo explained his action by his unwillingness to help Cyclops with what the Emperor of Mankind had forbidden him to touch. Such an eloquent move should have said more than if his brother had simply refused to complete Antikythera's project. Magnus, however, did not heed his warning. A colonial spaceship built...
Yeah, he'd be so set on getting knowledge, he wouldn't care. Like, he would throw, like, any, like, statement, like anyone telling him basically to stop or to find another avenue would be basically thrown to the wayside.
The long night was discovered beneath one of the cities. Inside, Cyclops found a device that had been used to siphon power from the Psykers long ago. Their torment was so intense that the tormented souls formed a gestalt entity named Shaitan. To defeat it, the Primarch placed himself in this entity and saw the torment of all the tormented souls. He opened his consciousness to Shaitan, and the latter saw the reason for such inhumane acts of the past. Mankind had evolved too fast. Suddenly there were many carriers of the Psyker gene, and disaster was inevitable. The general insanity began with the psionics and struck the rest of the planet, plunging it into an abyss of destruction and death. Thus, the long night descended upon the galaxy one day. What went on that ship was monstrously vile and immoral, but it kept Morgenstern safe from the horrors of the long night, for there were no Psykers on the planet. The agony and fear of losing his abilities gave Magnus strength. He fought the mighty Shaitan and managed to defeat him. In the end, the Primarch won and imprisoned the entity in his book, not for the purpose of captivity, but for the purpose of salvation, so that the tormented souls of the Psykers could find peace. However, he showed no such mercy to the planet's population. Realizing that Shaitan's influence had spread to almost everyone, and they would rather die waiting for ascension than allow themselves to be saved, Magnus subjected the planet to exterminatus. And then the evacuation.
Well, what the planet, because everyone would rather just wait and die. Lub, hi. That's... Oh, I feel like, yeah, a lot of the Primarchs are kind of this or die kind of mentality.
The fleet was shot into orbit as well. There was no other course of action, for the seeds of the apocalyptic cult of Shaitan could germinate elsewhere. At that moment, Magnus saw in Perturabo the first rusty spots of distrust. This was almost at the very beginning of the Great Crusade. It's hard to say whether Magnus the Red drew any conclusions for himself, but he certainly received unequivocal warnings about the dangers of the warp. The Great Crusade pressed onward.
Okay.
While the other Space Marine legions brought worlds to concord, Magnus the Red turned his attention to worlds that seemed unusual to him. For instance, on a world such as Agoru, the currents of the warp softly brushed against its surface. The planet would have been a perfect sphere, immaculate in its structure, were it not for the mountain that punctuated the flow of the great ocean. The planet was inhabited by a primitive human civilization that preserved ancient legends of a race of elder beings they referred to as the Old Ones.
Oh! I have a feeling he's going to be like the Primarch of the Old Ones, basically. Or something like that.
Apparently, the natives called the Eldar race by this name. According to their mythology, most of the Old Ones perished, but among the survivors were creatures distorted by an unknown force called the Daestai. They were as fierce as they had been beautiful before. The Elohim fought the Daestai and drove them into the dungeon beneath the world. They did not have the strength to completely destroy their enemies, but they erected a mountain, thus closing the dungeon. Then they placed giant guards at the entrance. The Daestai remained underground, but their thirst for killing is unquenchable. And so every year, the people of Agoru bring their dead there to keep the Daestai slumbering. This hillock has become known tacitly as the Man-Eating Mountain. Magnus was interested in this structure because of its size and the presence of ritual amulets at the foot, each of which exceeded the height of 3 people. These dead stones served as a tool to blunt the psychic forces surrounding the artificial summit. The captain of the 6th Fellowship of the Thousand Suns accidentally awakened the mysterious power when he touched one of the Titan Guardians. The awakened Guardians attacked the uninvited guests and were defeated by the combined forces of the Thousand Suns and Space Wolves. Magnus reached inside the mountain and fought the evil that lurked in the heart of the world. then cast spells on the rift through which the warp energy seeped. But there he touched the knowledge that he had been waiting for on Aguru. He sensed the billions of paths diverging from that place, and the infinite possibility of a universe bound by a web of conceptual conduits, threading the space between worlds. The vast expanse of the galaxy.
I'm not even going to pretend to fully understand half of this. I want you to know. Some of this is just like a bit too nuanced right now.
The galaxy shone with golden threads that bound it together as stone-paved roads had once bound the Roman Empire together. Even a gifted creature like Magnus couldn't memorize the entire labyrinth, but the moment he'd made contact behind the wall of darkness, he'd memorized millions of roads and access points. He couldn't see the entire web in an instant, but what he saw was enough to find other entrances and exits. He had discovered the Eldar web and planned to present it to the Emperor in the future, not realizing that his father already knew much more about it. After the battle,
So, Magnus is basically... Are they like an antithesis to the Emperor, kind of? In that the Emperor knows what to do with this knowledge. Magnus just seeks out the knowledge, kind of, and ends up misplacing it or something.
Magnus explained that the creatures they had encountered were actually demons, some of the most dangerous inhabitants of the Great Ocean. This information worried the Space Wolves, who were working with the Thousand Suns. Later on the planet, Shrike Magnus met with Leman Russ before storming Raven's fortress. Their brief exchange of insults at first horrified Ahriman, but then he realized that the brothers were bantering with each other in this way. He noticed, however, that there was not a hint of warmth in the brotherly handshake, and that the Primarch's phrases hid barbs that neither of them wished to reveal ahead of time. There was no doubt that tension was growing between the legions, and such contradictory formations.
We got to see Leman Russ, guys!
Space Wolves could be bitter enemies if they were on opposite sides of some military conflict. Several incidents occurred during the assault, during which the Wolves fought a battle with the Sons of Magnus. And then one of the legionnaires of the Thousand Suns began to have a flesh change. The formless monster stretched out its multi-jointed hands toward Magnus, who prepared to grant it peace. But the next moment, the monster's body was pierced by a projectile from Leman Russ. The wolves spilled the blood of the son of Magnus right in front of Cyclops' eyes. The two Primarchs immediately rushed at each other, and the battle would have been overly bloody had it not been for the intervention of Lorgar, Primarch of the Word-Bearers.
I do not like this guy. Every time he's a part of it, something goes wrong, or he convinces someone of something stupid.
On the surface of Shrike, Magnus's loud accusations of sorcery rang out. Leman Russ heard his wolves use the same power as the Thousand Suns, but laughed in response. Lorgar managed to calm their fury with his eloquence, but as he left, the wolf slashed his palm with his blade and promised to avenge the blood of the Sons of Fenris. It was a grim warning of things to come. Time passed. Along with the hatred of mutants and psychers in the other legions, there was a growing dislike of Magnus and the Thousand Suns. There were recorded instances of Primarchs expressing displeasure that an entire Psyker Legion was allowed to exist and serve the Great Crusade. There have even been suggestions...
I don't understand... On one hand, I kind of understand that they don't like the warping and stuff, and like... There's distrust on that, but like... Wouldn't you want all that you can use? I feel like there should be a little bit of trust there for Magnus's Legion. He's not like attacking you. I think the problem is he's way too focused on getting all this knowledge and he's not paying attention to things he should.
That the Legion be disbanded,
or he just doesn't care.
as was the case with the 2nd and 11th. After much debate over the use of psychers, the Emperor convened a conclave on the remote planet of Nicaea, where representatives of all the legions arrived. The Space Wolves were the main opponents of the use of psychers, for they shared their Primarch's hatred of sorcery. At the council, in place of Leman Russ, it was Other Weirdmake, often referred to as the Fate Weaver among some translations, who levelled accusations against the 15th Legion, the Thousand Sons. He charged them with the practices of sorcery, witchcraft, and the employment of forbidden magics. His accusations were supported by Primarch Mortarion of the Death Guard, recounting a number of companies where they had witnessed the horrors of sorcery. He also recalled that there were no librarians in his legion, for he had disliked them since his youth on Barbarous. As Magnus listened to the accusations, there was an inner struggle between rage and the need to justify himself, between a raging instinct and a higher intellect. He wished to fall upon his brothers, who, in their own limited way, had stigmatized him. But reason, capable of ascending into the warp and casting a glance from the outside, restrained that desire and condemned base emotion. When it was the Crimson King's turn to keep his word, he was calm. In his speech he compared the current views of the Psychers to those of the scientist of old Earth who tried to convince everyone that the planet was not flat. Then he talked about the Imperium of the future, envisioning it as an ideal state of progress and enlightenment, where scientists, philosophers and warriors participate equally in creating a brilliant future. He invited us to imagine what the people of this beautiful age would think as they gazed through the veil of time into the present day. What they would learn about, and what conclusions they would draw. They would realize with horror how close to extinction the torch of enlightenment was that day. The art of questioning everything is the source of all knowledge. To abandon it is to condemn ourselves to a slow decline, to condemn the Imperium to the darkness of ignorance, where people who dare to seek knowledge are viewed with suspicion. This was not the Imperium Magnus believed in, nor was it the Imperium he wanted to be a part of. Then Magnus told a parable about the dangers of sharing knowledge with those who have too narrow a view of reality. He spoke of a people who lived in a cave, whose food was scanty vegetation and water dripping from the rocks, and whose only source of light was a small fire. But one day the wind blew, and one of the cave dwellers decided to find out where it was blowing from. When the man came out of his lair, he saw a beautiful world with bright, warm sunshine.
I'm liking this, like... I will say this, holy crap, what the hell? Why are we, like, please tell me he didn't actually say, take the flat earthers side. You're literally alive when you can see that the earth is round. Like, oh my god.
And he looked at the cave as a prison. When he learned about the existence of such a beautiful new world, he had the idea to show it to his friends. But they called him crazy and did not want to leave the limited reality. So he climbed the mountain and started digging until he reached the cave. When the light of the sun illuminated the cave vaults, his friends rejoiced and went with him into a beautiful new world. The audience was enchanted by his story, but Ahriman knew that the Primarch had deliberately changed the ending. For in the original version of the legend, the friends were so frightened by the scene that they killed the man and retreated deep into the cave, taking the fire with them to continue their life in the eternal gloom. Magnus's speech impressed many, and some of the brothers were ready to take his side. But the Emperor gave the final verdict, setting the record straight. Now listen to my decision.
I'm a ghost leaf now, short
And
stinky
a
worm
multitude of
gremlin.
feathers squeaked in the amphitheatre. I cannot help but see the needs of the Imperium, but I cannot help but see the real state of people's souls. I have heard knowledge compared to abstract concepts, how it is claimed to be as easy to operate as a sword or a gun, but it isn't. Power is a living force, and the chief danger in the possession of power lies in obsession. A man who achieves a certain measure of might soon falls under its influence and can think of nothing else but reaching new limits. Almost every man is capable of resisting the vicissitudes of fate, but only a few are of sufficiently firm character to wield power and not succumb to its dark temptations. Looking into the darkness to gain knowledge from the warp is very dangerous, for it is a space of shifting reality and bizarre lies. The seeker of truth must be sure that he has not succumbed to delusion, for false knowledge is even more dangerous than ignorance. All people seek knowledge, but few are willing to pay for it.
Basically, the Emperor was like, yeah, you're very smart, but you're just looking at it and you're taking everything at face value. Basically, I take the warp as basically an at least in this instance, it is a parallel to the internet. You're not supposed to take every single thing at face value. You need to double and triple and quadruple check things sometimes to make sure you're getting the full story. Make sure you're not being swayed by bias or just plain out lied to. At least that's what I'm kind of understanding from that.
People will always seek shortcuts and easy ways to gain power, and it is not the enemy that draws them to the path of evil, but their own thoughts. True knowledge comes only with the attainment of wisdom. Without wisdom, a man who has power will never gain power, but will become careless. His power will turn against his master and eventually destroy everything he has.
Basically, what the Emperor is saying is, I'm seeing that you constantly keep going for all this knowledge and stuff, but you're not limiting yourself. You're not. I'm gonna fight you, you can. But like he's saying, Magnus, all you're doing is gathering the knowledge and taking it and taking every single thing at face value and like constantly building it. You're never like limiting yourself. You're not letting things settle. You're not letting you're showing that you have no real self-control when it comes to this stuff.
I've traveled paths beyond the reach of any man, and I have faced the spawn of the warp that cannot be named aloud. I know all too well the dangers and secrets of the darkness, and these trials are not for the faint of heart, however knowledgeable and powerful they may think themselves to be. And I've managed to uncover some secrets, but as a warning, not a temptation for further exploration. And those who go too far in pursuit of secrets not meant for mortals will only face doom and eternal torment. I see now that I have in vain allowed my sons to plunge into depths of which it would have been better for them not to have known. All must realize that no judgment will be passed, for the conclave was assembled for the sake of unity, not for the sake of strife. But the temptations of sorcery must no longer tempt any of the Astartes. From this moment forward, I command that all librarians be dissolved. All warriors and instructors are to return to their battle companies and never use psychic powers again. Woe to him who dares to ignore the ban or tries to deceive me. He will be my enemy, and on his head and the heads of his followers will fall such a punishment that to the end of the world they will curse the day they turned away from my light. The thunderous words of the Emperor of mankind were nothing short of a sentence for Magnus and the 1,000 Sons. They were forbidden to practice sorcery and seek the knowledge they craved. Disappointed and dissatisfied with this decision, the Crimson King was forced to accept the new ban, but soon tried to find a rational explanation to get around them. He foresaw the ruinous powers crafting a malevolent scheme around the War Master, Horus, and sought to warn him. By projecting his psychic essence into Horus's dreams, he aimed to alert his brother to the impending danger. However, he was oblivious to the corruption already festering within Horus, and the critical role the word-bearers would play in the unfolding tragedy.
I swear I hate the word-bearers. Alright, we're gonna end there for that. Do we usually watch all of it at once? We don't, right? I'm gonna make sure that. Yeah, we don't usually watch the whole thing. But this little butt, kick him in the face. But yeah. Alright. Let's figure out what we're playing today, guys. Very interesting story, though. want you all to know I hate you for the SCPs though, because now they've started appearing on my For You page and stuff, and a lot of the pictures terrify the heck out of me. I mean, not terrify me, but like, creep the heck out of me. Just